birth of John Paul II. Next year we will also celebrate the anniversaries of two important encyclical letters by John Paul II, Laborem Exercens and Centesimus Annus. John Paul II's historical role was and is still very important. As a person, he has played very serious role as a spiritual leader, and also in fighting against communism, against the structures of sin, which will be discussed by Professor Dębiński. I also welcome Paul Dębiński. Also, I welcome you here. He will be the second speaker. I also always say that John Paul II was the first and probably the only Polish global leader in the history. So it is also that we are very proud of him. Well, today there is also big discussion, and sometimes there are controversies. Maybe we will touch them, but nevertheless, I think his role was absolutely fantastic and important. We work here at the Economic University, so it's necessary to rethink his input into economy management, society, business ethics. Today, we have also to not only to rethink and to discuss the legacy of John Paul II, but also of his of the next popes, Benedict XVI and Francis, and their impact to the and input into the Catholic social teaching and to the global debate is very important. We also live in very specific time, in very specific moment, the time of crisis, time of COVID-19. What will be the results of this crisis? What will be the implications for economy, for society, for business, for politics, also for morality, for spirituality? For me, it's also very interesting what will be the implications of everything I have touched. Also to the education of leaders. We say that Warsaw School of Economics, SGH, educates the leaders. Well, that's true, but it is not very easy thing. So the question is how to create new leaders in difficult conditions and in challenging conditions. Our session is today's session. In the very beginning, we are going to have one day on the 3rd, on the 4th of December, but it was not very easy. First, because this program for one day could be too big, too intensive, and people don't like sitting all the day at the computer. And the second, that well, for some persons the 3rd was better, for some persons the 4th was better. So we have decided to organize it in 2 days. The program you have received, however, there will be some small changes, but there will be some changes in the program. Unfortunately, Professor Simona Beret, Professor Helen Alford will have her presentation tomorrow morning, because she couldn't do it today. Most of the program today are the speeches and presentations by you who are present, but we also have received 2 movies, one from Professor Simona Baretta, because she couldn't be personally in real conditions, but she has delivered us a very interesting presentation. So after Professor Zamani and after Professor Dębiński, we will have also movie, and later also we'll have presentation by Professor Michał Łuczewski from the Warsaw University. Earlier, he was also Deputy Director of John Paul II Research Center. Part of the program will be also tomorrow. Today we have to finish before 1 o'clock. Tomorrow we'll have more presentations. Concerning the order, I think after the presentations, which can last from 20 to half an hour even, because we have more time. There will be still possible discussion or questions from the persons on here on Teams, other participants of the session, and also our students. I also want to welcome my students from my students club, scientific club. They will also observe the chat and they will present some questions if necessary. So thank you very much again for your coming, virtual coming here. Now I will give the floor to Professor Zamani, but before, I think many people know Professor Zamani very well. He was our guest, I think 2 years ago, but some ideas concerning Professor Zamani. He was born in Rimini. You are born in Rimini, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Studied in England and in Italy and England. He is well known as the advisor to 3 popes, John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis. He is specialist in history of economics, philosophy of economics, ethics, business ethics. He has developed the concept of civil economy, economy of happiness, but also economy of communion, because he is strongly connected with the Focolari movement. He's the author of many books about civil economy and some other. I can show you one of our common books prepared together with me, with Professor Zamani, with Professor Dębiński, and some Mr. Michał Łuczewski and some other. Przewodnik po moralnym kapitalizmie. It is about the concept of moral capitalism. With me, I also have one of the Professor Zamani's book about civil economy. Very interesting, but there is a lot of other books. So, Professor Zamani, the floor is yours. We can start. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I am very, very happy to be with you in this occasion. So let me thank you for the invitation that you give to me to participate to this very important symposium dedicated to the first centenary of the birth of Saint John Paul II. And let me congratulate with the Warsaw School of Economics for the initiatives and the activities that this institution is carrying along. Now, let me enter into my topic. Due to time constraint, I will base my considerations in this presentation on 3 main texts of John Paul II. Sollecitudo Rei Socialis, 1987, before that Laborem Excensus, and Centesimus Annus, 1991. Of course, other important relevant documents have been pronounced, but as I said, I will focus mainly on these 3. Let me start from this general consideration. One of the marks of our time is a constant call for ethics, which has progressively replaced over the past quarter of a century the persistent call for politics, typical of the 60s of last century, when it was imagined that everything was politics. But a disagreement on the primacy of ethics ceases when it comes to tangible moral issues. That is why Alasdair MacIntyre observed the apodictic use of moral principles serves only to put an end to the ethical dialogue itself. In other words, the broad convergence on ethics in public debate almost never translates into ethical consensus. The teaching of Pope John Paul II insisted constantly on this aspect. In his speech to the United Nations on October the 5th, 1995, John Paul II stressed that it is possible to reach an agreement on social and political issues on a shared common basis, since, I quote from him, the universal moral law written in the heart of man is a sort of grammar which helps the world face the debate over its future, unquote. And in February 2004, the year before he passed away, in his address to the members of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, John Paul II said that the main obstacle to the dialogue was, I quote, the diffusion among faithful of an ethics based on fides, hence the lack of an objective benchmark for laws, which are often based on social consensus alone. Now, this was my way of introduction. To give some way to these words and many other pieces of his teaching, let me remind that the moral agency has a dual aspect: inhibitive, which means refraining from behaving immorally, and proactive, doing good things. In general, theories of morality focus on the inhibitive form much more than in the proactive one. The consequences are under our eyes. Morality is reduced to moralism. And above all, the more serious consequence of the neglect of the proactive dimension is moral disengagement, in the sense of Albert Bandura, the famous American psychologist, one of the top at the world level, who just a few years ago published an important book whose title is Moral Disengagement. What is that? Moral disengagement is a cognitive process that serves to deactivate the self-regularity processes that morality deter individuals from actions that violate their own moral standard. That is why this phenomenon today is immensely spread in the business world. In other words, people do not object to the principles. That is the point. But they tend to adapt the principle in order to justify their own situation. And that creates problems, because if one would object to the principles themselves, one could have an argument, could counter-argue. The point is that they say, for instance, that is not proper to pollute, that is not acceptable to exploit other people, etc. But then they behave in the other side. That is called moral disengagement. Now, let me come to the point, the ground theme, which has been developed in Centesimus Annus, is the one concerning the issue of international governance. A global government seems to be at the same time desirable and necessary in order to enforce strong, inclusive policies, and undesirable and impossible, since it would reduce the space of legitimate freedom of both people and states. So, what should be done? Now, the answer, in my opinion, is to be found in another word, which is governance, which sometimes is confused with government. Rather than imagining a new world government, which is impossible and not desirable, in my opinion, it is advisable to focus attention on the existing systems of world governance. United Nations, with its network of international organizations, regional entities such as the EU, Mercosur, Pacto Andino, G8, G20, etc., in order to see what is working and what is not working and why. Now, the point is that while the protection of workers' rights remains mainly organized on a national basis, capital is fully globalized. It is this asymmetry that has and is generating a new form of competition, the competition between free labor and slave labor. It is therefore urgent a world initiative similar to the GATT that has brought to the establishment of WTO. Can we conceive a general agreement on wages and labor for the protection of workers' rights on a world scale? This is a question mark that I remember John Paul II raised in the year 2000 in the occasion of the Great Jubilee, where he also declared his adherence to the notion of decent work. And decent work is not to be confused with the just work. Now, it is known that the systematic violation of human rights, what in Latin were called iura hominum, human rights, is associated to the action of about 17,000 multinational corporations operating at the world level. These have been able to create their own commercial code, so to speak, a clear example of soft law. Now, can we be satisfied with the guiding principles prepared by the special Ruggie, after the name of Professor Ruggie Commission on behalf of the United Nations, a commission instituted after the failure of the Mary Robinson Commission and approved in the summer of 2011 by the UN? This is another big question about which there is no debate going on. Of course, the Ruggie principles contain some important points, but it seems to me that they are not enough to reach the goals which have been indicated in the beginning. An area where the lack of international governance is today particularly problematic is that of fiscal coordination among states. A reasonable level of tax competition is certainly positive in view of improving the allocation of resources. However, in the present conditions, that level has been abundantly overtaken. Not a few states have tax regulations especially suited to attract capitals unwilling to pay taxes in the countries where the resources have been created to shelter purely speculative financial operation and to facilitate money laundering in the service of organized crime. Now, it is not tolerable that we should continue along such a path. And today, most of the people, both politicians and not, are aware of that. But no actual action has been taken so far. Second, a recent empirical evidence shows that today market interactions causally affects the willingness to accept severe negative consequences for a third party. This indicates that people do not care about pecuniary externalities. It is well known that market price does not include the full cost of the ensuing consequences of an economic choice. And it is known that the price system not only operates to guarantee allocative efficiency, but it also distributes incomes and wealth across the economy. So yet mainstream economics consider only technical externalities. For the economists present at the conference, let me remind them, of course, the work by Pigou, the pupil of Alfred Marshall. He was the first to introduce the notion of externality, and later Ronald Coase. But all these people talk about technical externalities, not about pecuniary externalities. Those pecuniary externalities are those having to do with the distributive dimension of price changes. So that is a major fault of we as economists. We are very responsible because we keep on teaching not wrong things, but only partial things, only certain things and not others. In our textbooks, no mention at all is made of pecuniary externalities. And still, today, in the time of globalization, pecuniary externalities, much more than technical externalities, are involved. The third element is that a pressing issue today concerns the way one should understand the construction of welfare programs. Granted that it is accepted that a welfare system should be based upon universalistic principles, how is it possible to design such a system without falling into the trap of paternalistic assistantialism? That again, it's a major problem, in particular for the social Catholic teaching, but not only for social Catholic teaching. The challenge is of conciliating solidarity and subsidiarity is the challenge of living in a human society. Solidarity is not just a matter of redistribution of income or wealth. Rather, it has to do with inclusion. In other words, it is a matter of participation, a participation through which persons and the communities become truly dignified protagonists of their own destiny. Still, it is dominant in the common parlance, the idea that solidarity has to do with assistantialism, but has nothing to do. And again on that, John Paul II used in many occasions, clarified this point. Now, it is obvious that at this point, let me check my time because I should respect the rule. Let me consider what is today the problem affecting directly the business world, in particular the new models of management and of making economic activities. In other words, that is the issue of business leadership in a post-crisis era. The landscape of contemporary corporations is changing. Since the financialization of the economy in the early 80s of last century, corporate governance practices tightly linked to purpose of business with maximizing shareholder value. However, as the 21st century pushes on, there has been an increased emphasis on other stakeholder values, particularly social and environmental concerns. This trend in corporate governance has fueled the emergence of new organizational forms. So far, attention has been devoted mainly to the business model. It seems to me that time has come to reconsider the role of the management model also, even though most people continue to talk about business model only. Now, empirical evidence shows that the major crises of our time are a result of the way we conduct a business. The traditional corporate form has in many ways monopolized our understanding of how we think about and talk about business. The rise of new forms of organization will require reimagining what are the fundamental building blocks of business. One cause of this is certainly our misconception about the nature and the role of the company. It is dangerously reductionist to characterize a company as a mere nexus of contracts, to quote Ronald Coase, between different parties, such as employees, suppliers, investors, clients, community. According to the nexus of contracts view, the company exists for the benefit of its owners, the shareholders, and those charged with running it, the directors. They have the duty to further their interest. Today, we know that this approach has serious theoretical defects, as was remarked, among others, by John Paul II in his encyclical Centesimus Annus. Today we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the famous statement by Milton Friedman when he says in 1970, the famous phrase, the only social responsibility of businesses is to maximize profits at any cost. And recently, the University of Chicago has opened a sort of a debate on that statement. And it's interesting to observe how the situation has been changed, because that statement by Friedman is theoretically wrong. I say theoretically wrong, showing that he did not know certain elements of economic theory, apart from other considerations. So there is a movement in this direction, which perhaps is not sufficiently robust or sufficiently, let's say, sufficiently strong to modify the pre-existing situation. The recently published report by UN, published in 2015, the title of this report, which is very interesting, is Impact, Transforming Business, Changing the World, was published, as I said, in New York 5 years ago, on the results achieved during the first 15 years since the launch of the UN Global Compact, gives evidence that corporate practices are changing, albeit in a slow motion, as a consequence of high-profile clashes between companies and civil society. It is becoming increasingly clear that the single-minded goal of profit maximization at any cost is fracturing societies and destroying the environment. Essentially, business has been threatening the very element that guaranteed its existence. Of course, to that we should add last year's declaration by 181 members of the Business Roundtable in the United States, and the declaration of last August of this year of 14 CEOs of 14 major multinationals, more or less following the same path. So something is occurring. Today, the umbrella of corporate sustainability, both social and environmental, covers a much broader range of issues than before. However, there is still a very long way to go before sustainability is fully embedded into the DNA of business globally. But there are clear signs of progress. In this regard, a strategically important role has been and will be played by civil society organizations. And among them, I have, of course, to include the churches, the various churches, that contribute to a cognitive overhaul around the purpose of business and its obligations to society, inspiring a new narrative around business as a force for good. And again, in this regard, the role played by John Paul II is extremely relevant. It would be enough for me to quote the notion of structure of sins. This is a an expression coined for the first time by John Paul II. And the notion of the structure of scenes today is very, but very relevant. Let me now, in fact, the point is that today is more clear that if things go wrong, it's not only because individual people misbehave. That was the old attitude, even in ethics. The point is that if the rules of the games, because the structures of scene are nothing but the rules of the economic and financial game. So if the rules of the games are wrong, it is obvious that even though I, as an individual, I try to behave properly according to my moral code, the results will be bad results. So that is why it is not enough to fall into the trap of moralism, saying you have to behave. That is not enough. We have to change the rules of the game, as I mentioned before, in particular at the international level, etc. And in this regard, an important book, which has been published last year, 1 year ago, in the United States, is the one by Catherine Pistor. Catherine Pistor, she is a professor of law, commercial law, I would say, or law for economy at the University of Princeton. And she is one of the major. The title of the book is revealing. The title is The Code of Capital. Try to read it. I congratulated her because I said, Catherine, she comes originally from Germany, but she moved to the States a long time ago, and now she's an American citizen. And she's one of the outstanding figures. I congratulated her and said, because I congratulate for your courage, because she had in this book the courage to denounce what I just said, namely that the rules of the games are such to determine more and more inequalities, irrespective of individual behavior, irrespective of what small groups or individuals try to do, etc. Again, that is another sign which demonstrates that things are changing. And in this regard, I stress it again, the role played by John Paul II was really very, very important. And it is a pity that sometimes even within the Catholic world, the notion of structures of sin is very seldom quoted. Sometimes I get crossed because the attitude is moralism. And that is not enough, because today, if we want to be serious, we have to operate in order to do that job, which does not mean that individual morality is not important. What I'm saying is not enough. And that is why John Paul II introduced that notion. Now, a profound disruption is happening today in the workplace and in the economy at large, as the relentless march of technology has brought us to a point where machines and software are not just outworking us, but they are starting to outthink us in more and more realms. That is the point. If machines compete with people in thinking, what makes us humans unique? And what will enable us to continue to create social and economic value? The answer is the one think machines will never have, namely a heart. Humans can love and can have compassion. Machines cannot love, neither can have compassion. This implies that the tech revolution will force human beings to create more value with hearts and between hearts. Whence the growing importance of more human-to-human connections. Machines can be programmed to do the next thing right, but only humans can do the next right thing. That is a point that why do I mention that? Because today, two major lines of thought are fighting among themselves. One is the transhumanist project. The transhumanism is a project which was started in California, in the States, at the beginning of the century, when the University of Singularity was created. And today, the University of Singularity is dominating. Why? Because they receive a lot of money to do research, but a lot means a lot, not just normal money. And we can understand why the university was located in California, because California is the state where GAFAM is the acronym standing for Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, five. The five giants in the tech are today controlling more than 80% of the world, at the world level of the tech sector, etc. And so they keep on financing this university. And as you know, Kurzweil, who is the head of research, Professor Kurzweil of the University of Singularity, has declared last year that by 2050, which means in 30 years, the new intelligence, artificial intelligence, the new robots will be able to create, be careful, artificial conscience. Because intelligence is something, conscience is not. In other words, what I just said, they are aiming at replacing the human being by the new type of machines. Now, I personally do not believe that, but it is a fact that these ideas are spreading around. And it is obvious that the counter project, which has its own locus place in Europe, which is called the Neo-Humanist project, is, of course, in opposition to that. But we have to admit that we are lagging behind, because so far, European Union has not done enough. Something has been done, but it's not done enough in order to criticize and to contrast the spreading of the transhumanist project, etc. So that is why on this issue, if John Paul II were still alive, I'm pretty sure that we would be able to hear his voice. Of course, Pope Francis is trying his best to move in that direction. I have to conclude because I'm finishing my time. We know that by the rules of reason alone, one can certainly rationalize the existing, but cannot invent much. Indeed, in order to really invent, one needs to cast a sketch of sense behind the customary rationality. It seems to me that for this task, those who recognize an eschatological dimension are better equipped than those who live within a purely enlightened rational dimension, which is surely capable of bringing to rigorous analysis, much less so to creative problem solving. This is perhaps the most significant contribution of Catholic social teaching towards overcoming the neo-Machiavellian trend and the sentiment of despair so massively present in today's culture. Indeed, it is the lack of hope today which is a major impediment to the spreading of the sense of possibility, which is so necessary in order to change our cognitive maps and to allow entrepreneurs of all kinds to play their critical role in bringing ideas to life. It is exactly for this reason that is ultimately the great, let's say, message of John Paul II, to whom we are deeply grateful for what he has been done and for his legacy. Thank you very much. I have respected the time.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Zamani. I also want to add that Professor Zamani is also the head of the Academy of Social Science at Vatican, Pope's Academy. Well, maybe somebody has the question to Professor Zamani now, because we still have some minutes to for question or for short comments, but please rather short questions, and you can answer, because we know that your time is also limited today. So if somebody has any question, and of course, if our students, if you have some questions from the audience, also you can ask. So the floor is yours, and you can ask questions. Maybe I will start from my, well, I have two ideas. First, what will be the consequences of COVID crisis according to you? And the second, we are at the university, and I sometimes think what we at the universities should do in our education, in our teaching of future leaders. What are strong and weak points here?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for these two questions, which are very, very relevant. And so I am pleased that you raised them. The first one, COVID. In a very recent set of articles, which means a week ago, published on Lancet, which is the famous, the top one at the world level journal of medical studies, Lancet. Now, they published a series of articles where the main argument is the following. COVID-19 is not a pandemic. Is not a pandemic, as we keep on saying, but it is a syndemic. Syndemic. Syndemic is a Greek word, as you know, like a pandemic. What do they mean? They mean the following. I am referring to the top scientists at the world level. We are not talking of a minor journal or minor research group. They mean the following, that this tragedy affecting us today is certainly due to the coronavirus 19. But viruses always existed, even before. Why we had this year, well, starting last year, but this year, this effect? Because today there is a demonstration that viruses, in order to spread around among the people and to generate the disasters they are generating, they need some other factors cooperating with them. Syndemic, in Greek means together. And what are these other factors? First of all, climate change. Second, deforestation, because we know that coronavirus, these viruses lived in the forest, and they've been expelled by their trees. Why? Because we humans, we keep on cutting trees. And so they spill over to some animals, in particular some snakes, etc., and from the animals to the human beings. Second, inequalities. Now, there is evidence that social inequalities tend to spread viruses for understandable reasons. Because, third, the health systems. If the health systems are inadequate, it is obvious why in certain countries the same viruses is generating less disasters than in others. Why? The virus is the same, but the effects are different. So that is the point, that I am sure that when the COVID crisis will be over, major things have to be rethinked. And in this regard, there are two main strategies which are, let's say, confronting themselves in the current debate. One is called business as usual strategy, which says, well, now we had this disgrace, it will be over, and then we will continue as before. Now, this strategy, if will be taken, will be a disaster. Why? Because in 9-10 years, another pandemic will occur, and we have been assured about that. This is not a joke. It's not a joke. It has already been established by, for instance, Dr. Fauci, Anthony Fauci in the United States. You know his figure. He already announced that. So we cannot go back to the previous model of social life, economic organization, etc. The other strategy, or the other way out, is the way out which is called transformative resilience. What does it mean? You know what does it mean resilience? What does it mean transformative? That we have to transform and not to reform. Conservative people talk about reforms, because the reforms means to do the same form in a new way as before. But we have to transform entire blocks of our social organization. And in this regard, as you know, the role played by Pope Francis is fundamental. Pay attention. In his speeches, even in the last encyclical, Fratelli Tutti and Laudato Si, he never used the word reforms. He always talked about transformation, because reforms are not enough. Reforms are good for ordinary times. But if we live in an extraordinary time, we need to transform. We need to transform the financial sector. We need to transform the organization of work in our company. Why are we still sticking to the Tayloristic model? That is a disaster. Taylorism was successful in a certain historical period and on purely efficiency grounds. But it's a disaster from a social and moral grounds. And the point is that people never read the book by Friedrich Taylor. But if you read, it's amazing how in 1911 he was able to write what he wrote. If you want, I can quote one example. In chapter 2, he says, how should managers treat workers at the assembly line? You know what he wrote? As if they were cows, because cows are animals which are never protest. Now, can you imagine treating human being like a cow? And it is written, and most managers started believing that. Of course, nowadays we will not use the same wording, but the substance is the same. Why we are not changing the Tayloristic with the holocratic model of work organization? The holocratic model today is much more advanced, much more capable of generating a common good and a common value. And that is the reason why we have to open a debate. And this brings me to the second of your question, namely the role of university. Because I too live in a university. I belong to the University of Bologna. But I feel a responsibility because we are not behaving properly. Not because what we do or what I say is wrong. No, but it is not enough. And let me quote in this regard an article which I had to read 3 times because I couldn't believe to my eyes. The article published in the Journal of Economic Literature, an American journal, in the last issue, which means a month ago, more or less, by George Akerlof. George Akerlof is a Nobel Prize of economics, and it's an outstanding figure, not only in the States, but all over the world. By the way, he is the husband, his wife, she's now the new Minister of Treasury of the United States, just Yellen. She too is an economist, but she's more practical economist, George Akerlof more. Now, the title of that article is The Sins of Omission of Mainstream Economics. Read it. Here, I understand there are many professors. Read it. You couldn't believe when he says we should be ashamed as economists for what we have been doing in the last century. Not because, I repeat for the last time, we said something wrong, but because we gave a representation of the economic world which is not adequate. The representation based on the assumption of Homo economicus. But Homo economicus is a disaster. It has no meaning at all. It's false. False from a practical point of view, as it has been demonstrated, and it is theoretically with no philosophical ground. But still, until very recently, people talk about Homo economicus, and the university keep on teaching this economic theory and application based on that assumption. The second is, in other words, the role of university have to become more. In fact, I appreciated Akerlof. I sent him a message because I happened to know him a long time ago, congratulating him. I said, you had a great courage, because he ended the article with the following suggestion. We have to change the rules for admissions to the academic career. And we should stop with the so-called top 5. Top 5 are the top 5 journals. Unless you publish there, you will not get a chair. You will not become a professor in the United States. You have only to publish on that. And to conclude, another important piece of literature that was published exactly 1 year ago in Great Britain. You know certainly Nicholas Stern, and Andrew Oswald. Nicholas Stern now is at London School of Economics, and Andrew Oswald is in Oxford. Nicholas Stern is also a member, he's been proclaimed by the Queen Sir because he made major contribution to the so-called Stern Report on environmental issues. Now, in this article, they made the following exercise. They counted how many articles were published in the major journals, economic journals all over the world in the last 20 years. 20 years, not 200 years, 20 years. And they calculated that out of 7,700 scientific articles, how many of them were dedicated to discuss or debate the climate change environmental issue. Do you know how many? 55. 55 out of 7,700. And they concluded by saying we should be ashamed as economists, because as economists, we kept silent in the last few decades on the major issue of ecological issue, etc., etc. And the disasters, because it is obvious that if we economists continue to produce articles which keep on saying, don't worry about ecology, because there is no problem, we will have raw materials forever, blah, 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 obviously the managers in the various businesses area where they operate will follow suit. And they say, if they say so, it means that that is the way. So that is the major moral responsibility of university. And I expect that something will be changed. To this regard, to conclude, Pope Francis, whom we know he's a bit completely different from John Paul II. I had the privilege to know personally John Paul II. I remember I had also a lunch with him in the Vatican, and it was really fascinating because he was so intelligent and so humble that while we were eating, he was posing to us questions and he was writing in a block notes what we were saying. Can you imagine? That is a sign of humility, because great men are always humble people. I close the parenthesis. But that is why, as I said, Pope Francis continued to insist on the declaration that he read in October 15th, last 2 months ago, on the Global Pact on Education, where he heard all universities, but in particular Catholic universities, because in the world there are today 1,700 Catholic universities, and he urged them to change their program. They say, stop teaching obsolete things and try to introduce your young scholars, your young pupils to these issues, because that is the only way you can contribute to improve the situation and move ahead towards a better world.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you for your answer and for your personal reflection concerning also your contacts with John Paul II. Is there any question? If not, we will have to move to Professor Dębiński.
Oh yes, I see Paul Dębiński now.
Yes, yes, Paul Dębiński is here.
We have to listen. I'm sure that you, Paul, will speak in Polish.
No, but we were discussing.
I prefer to speak in English, but I can switch to Polish.
We have to listen to Paul because Paul is a wise, intelligent, and courageous man. So he's an important thing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Zamani. Thank you for your input, and I know that you will also have other duties today, but I hope you will also listen to Professor Dębiński.
Yes.
We were discussing with Professor Dębiński about the title, and he suggested me also something like the redefinition of the title, a bit structure of sin and technocratic paradigm, some reflections on commonalities and differences. So Professor Dębiński is also well known to us, to many of us. He was born in Poland, but he works now in Switzerland. He's specialist in economics, finance, but also ethical matters. There are many his publications also in Polish language. So Paul, the floor is yours. You are very welcome.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's a pleasure to be with you, even at distance. I would love to be on the stage in Warsaw, but well, maybe one day, hopefully. And I have prepared some transparencies in order to maybe to facilitate the dialogue and the communication. Stefano, you said wonderfully, you prepared for my talk. Thank you very much for it, because you insisted on the importance of structure from scenes. I would like to take two concepts of recent papal documents. On one side, the technocratic paradigm from Laudato Si, and also reflect on the structure of sin that has been mentioned by Stefano Zamani in his wonderful talk. My point is to see to what extent these two concepts converge and what are the possible differences. The point is that we are today in a crisis situation, not only because of the financial crisis, but because all the things that Stefano mentioned about the post-COVID world and the necessary transformation. And this world of transformation in Poland means something very precise and very recent, much deeper transformation that this country has been through than maybe the Western Europe. At least the much faster transformation. So I prepared a few transparencies with quotations, because maybe it will allow for the audience to follow, and maybe to go back to the text in order to have a proper understanding of these two concepts of technocratic paradigm and structure of sin. So I don't know if you can see it now. Can you see it? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So you see the PowerPoint, yes?
Yes.
Okay, 1 minute. I have to, whoop. No, sorry, I stopped the sharing. So sorry, I have too many open things. 1 minute. Up. Should be here and should be here. Okay, so here we are.
Yes, we see.
You see it, but I don't see it. Okay, so that's fine. And then U image is on the up. Here we go. Probably we should go. Okay. Okay, so now, can you see it? Yes.
Yes, now yes.
Okay, this is fine. I will just adjust the pointer. Sorry for this technological setup. Okay, so a few words about possible reflection on commonalities and differences. Let's start with Laudato Si, much closer to us, where technology, reflection about technology and technocratic paradigm takes a large part of considerations. And here are a few quotes that I think enlighten the thinking of the Pope. First, humanity has entered a new era in which our technical prowess has brought us to a crossroads. And this notion of crossroads, of course, is even stronger today in the COVID period. So we are at the crossroads. And the risk is growing day by day that man will not use the power as he should. And of course, he speaks not only of the political power, but mainly, and to a large extent, on technological power and all the things that are linked to technological power. In this sense, we stand naked and exposed to the fast face of our ever-increasing power, etc. So we stand naked, and I think this asymmetry between power of technology, and standing naked against it is a very important image, let's say. Technology is not neutral. Appropriate and positive sustainable progress has been made, but the risk of misuse of this power are very important. So for this reason, there is a necessity to critique the new forms of power.
We don't hear you now. Professor Dębiński, Paul, we do not hear you now. Zadzwonię do niego. We have some problems with voice. Paul, do you hear us? Paul? Maybe I will. Paul? Aha. technical problems, but I hope soon we will start again. I try to have the phone connection, but I phoned to him, but it is switched off. Tak, rozumiem. So we will have to wait for a moment for Professor Dębiński because there are some technical problems, but we don't know very well what has happened. He's probably not here, but maybe he has lost the connection. I apologize for this, but sometimes we have such situations, unfortunately. Our people responsible for technology are trying to do their best to improve, but we have to wait a moment. Ja do niego dzwonię, ale nie odbiera. Sorry for the technical problem. So we will now present the movie by Professor Simona Beretta. She has sent to us this material about teaching of John Paul II, and she's interested very much in the concept of integral development, the person in action, the person in relation. So we will be able now to see the movie by Professor Simona Beretta. She has sent to us this material about teaching of John Paul II, and she's interested very much in the concept of integral development, the person in action, the person in relation. So we will be able now to see the movie by Professor Simona Beretta. She has sent to us this material about teaching of John Paul II, and and she is a professor of economics in Milano at Università Cattolica di Sacro Cuore in Milano, and a Seri, Alta Scuola di Economia e Relazioni Internazionali. Very, very interesting and very nice person. Of John Paul II, she is a professor of economics in Milano at Università Cattolica di Sacro Cuore in Milano, and a Seri, Alta Scuola di Economia e Relazioni Internazionali.
His teachings have been a constant company in my work as an economist and provided fresh thinking all over my career. And this is something that made the difference for my life. What John Paul II allowed us to do was rethinking economics in view of integral development. At the beginning of the 21st century, his message was very clear. He said, the time has come for a new and deeper reflection on the nature of the economy and its purposes, a reconsideration of the concept of prosperity, in order to recognize the urgency of the need to ensure that the economic practices and the related political policies have as their aim the good of every person and of the whole person. Integral development. This is what a sound economy is about. The fresh thinking that John Paul II offered was about the person in action, this notion of action, the acting person. His contribution is incredibly rich, philosophical contribution. His point is, we think about man underlying the cognitive function. This is especially true in Western Europe and in Europe, in the Western world. And yet, this is what Karol Wojtyła was saying at that time. Does man reveal himself in thinking, or rather in the actual enacting of his existence? Action reveals the person. Actions give us the best insight into the inherent essence of the person and allows us to understand the person more fully. And this is something that we have been listening in recent messages. Paul Francis is keeping telling us that reality is more important than idea. Enacting is more important than thinking. And this is crucial if we speak of human work. Human work, laborem exercens, was just fresh air coming into the rooms where we were studying work as a factor of production, blah, blah. No. Rethinking the economics of work on the basis of John Paul II meant putting at the center action, free, unpredictable movement of a person, and a line of freedom of the person following his vocation as distinguished from behavior, which is mechanistic, economistic, algorithmic, we could say today. This is the only analytical basis for addressing the issue that concern human labor, wealth creation and development that are up to the need of understanding the nature and the purpose of economics. There's an interesting parallel with Hannah Arendt. She said, the fact that man is capable of action means that the unexpected can be expected from him, that he is able to perform what is infinitely improbable. This is what the future is about. This is what preparing the future means, to use another expression by Pope Francis, not preparing for the future, as if the future is not what we prepare today. We prepare the future. We are able to perform what is infinitely improbable. And the next step is the person in action is person in relation. In fact, in all social teaching of the Church, a relational dynamics is at the heart of everything that exists. We, human beings, are image of the Trinitarian God, and the universe is God's imprinting. He speaks to us also through things and the beauty and the fascination of reality. This is what elemental human experience confirms. We are person in relations since our birth. We didn't choose to be born. We were born in a given situation, in a given country, with the wealth of gifts we received. We are person in relations with things, with others, and with the ultimate meaning that every human being, according to its inner elemental human nature, is yearning for. Beauty, truth, justice, love. This is what interdependence is about, and John Paul II has been a key figure in understanding the importance of interdependence. Just mentioned Sollicitudo Rei Socialis. And this is also what the hashtag everything is connected means. We are indeed fratelli tutti. Within this perspective, the person in action, the person in relation, it's easy to understand what the dignity of work is about. The dignity of work is about being image of God. Man shares by his work in the activity of the Creator. Paul VI was also expressing this idea of workers as creators, as participating in creation. Within the limits of his own human capability, man, in a sense, continues to develop that activity and make it advance further and further in discovering resources and values contained in creation. We can create, yes, but by valorizing, giving value to what is already in the creation, in the whole of creation, material and non-material creation. And this is where we find the profound roots of integral development in human dignity, in the dignity of human work. This is very important, even prior to the logic of a fair exchange of goods, which is necessary in economics, and the forms of justice appropriate to it, commutative, distributive justice. There exists something which is due to man because he is a man, by reason of his lofty dignity. Inseparable from that required something is the possibility to survive and at the same time to make an active contribution to the common good of humanity, because making an active contribution is expressing, it's being an image of God. And Pope Francis uses the same, different words, but the same image. What is integral development? The possibility to survive and to make an active contribution. That's what's written in Centesimus Annus. And in his UN address in 2015, Pope Francis used this expression to enable real men and women to escape from extreme poverty. We must allow them to be dignified agents of their own destiny. Integral human development and full exercise of human dignity cannot be imposed. They must be built up and allowed to unfold for each individual, family, in communion with others, persons in actions, persons in relations. Yes, and we know that there are deep obstacles to integral human development. And these obstacles sometimes are material, economic in nature, but they are not only economical. They rest on more profound attitudes. The non-material dimension is key in action, and it's key in relations, attitudes, hope, aspirations. Even economic analysis is starting to recognize how important these are. So, the spiritual attitudes which define each individual's relationship with self, with neighbor, and even the remotest human communities, fratelli tutti, and with nature itself, Laudato Si, and all of this in view of higher values such as the common good, or to quote the felicitous expression of Populorum Progressio, the full development of the whole individual and of all people, integral human development. So, what are we talking about? Why is that the power given to man can turn against man himself? Indeed, we are increasingly aware this is Redemptor Hominis. This is the first encyclical that John Paul II gave when he was just sitting on the chair of Peter. We seem to be increasingly aware of the fact that the exploitation of the earth, the planet on which we are living, demands rational and honest planning. At the same time, it's not just a matter of rational and honest planning. The exploitation of the earth, not only for industrial, but also for military purpose, and the uncontrolled development of technology outside the framework of a long-range, authentical humanistic plan, often bring with them a threat to man's natural environment and alienate him in his relation with nature and remove him from nature. We are alienated. In other encyclical, John Paul II will speak of alienation as the refusal of the logic of gift. We are born in a gift relationship. We are given birth. And we live in a given reality that we didn't help to build. Alienation is thinking that one is the master of oneself. And this is very important because it has consequences. And the bad consequences that were already seen in 1979, that's Redemptor Hominis, before the Brundtland report that gave rise to the ecological movement within the UN family, that was 1982, okay? So with much in advance with respect to the international community, the obstacle to integral ecology were seen in the nature of the relationship of the human person with reality, an alienated relation. It's all very simple. This is another message that it's amazing that Karol Wojtyła was delivering to us. He says, he is the acting person, the complexity of the experience of man is dominated by its intrinsic simplicity. The complexity itself simply shows that the whole experience and consequently the cognition of man tends to compose a whole in cognition rather than to cause complexity. I see myself as myself in action and in relation. And Laudato Si provides the other side of the story. If we feel intimately united with all that exists in this simplicity, then sobriety and care will well up spontaneously. And this is the hope for our present and for our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the movie by Professor Simona Beretta. I apologize very much for the technical problems, and we try to connect again Professor Dębiński, and we try to have a contact with him. Unfortunately, I had problems with telephone. Probably he has switched off telephone, and we now try to connect him by internet, but still we have some times, and we can also use and also observe and also watch another one movie received from Nevada, from Professor Ragowska, who was working in Warsaw at Warsaw University, and now she lives in United States, and she cooperates with many foreign institutions, and she is a specialist in Catholic social teaching. Professor Rogaczewska, she will speak also about new interesting problems connected with the real world today, and also her observations from the point of view of the teaching of John Paul II and Pope Francis. So the idea is the source of social resilience in post-COVID-19 era, principal lessons from the teaching of John Paul II and Pope Francis. We are going to present this movie tomorrow, but because of the situation with problems with Professor Dębiński and connection with him, we will now observe this very interesting, in my opinion, material by Professor Rogaczewska. She is a very interesting person. She is interested in economics, sociology. She is a sociologist, and her experience is also experience of cooperation with Więź journal and some NGOs initiatives in Poland, and very involved always in Catholic social teaching, as well in sociology and implications. The floor is for Professor Maria Rogaczewska. Now she is in Nevada, and because of the time distance and time difference, it would be very difficult to invite her online here, because now it's the night. So we start the Maria Rogaczewska movie. Thank you, and sorry for the problems.
Thank you so much, Professor Tomasz Dołęgowski, for this opportunity to take part in this very unique event, in this conference, that I hope can bring a lot of new, fresh ideas that we really need in this special time of pandemic. My name is Maria Rogaczewska-Ross. I'm sociologist of religion from University of Warsaw, but now I'm a full-time housewife and mom, maybe the only one full-time housewife participating in this conference. So it's a great honor for me to be with you. Because of the time difference, I cannot be the live participant. That's why I prepared this little recording. And I would like to speak today about social resilience. By this concept, I mean the capacity of communities and societies to maintain the basic well-being, energy, and hope in times of various types of crises, such as COVID-19 pandemic. Most of you may know already this concept either from developmental psychology or systems theory. Developmental psychologists are in general consensus that resilience, the ability to survive bad childhood conditions, personal trauma, or other hard experiences will be one of the most important competences of future generations that will face energy crisis, climate crisis, and other kinds of crises that we cannot even envision now. And I can tell you that as a mom of 2 kids and expecting the third one, I'm thinking about it every day. There is a growing body of research about successful societies, so the societies that perform well on indicators such as population health, social justice, individual happiness. And this research shows that these societies are resilient societies. So this, they are kind of immune to the very hard situations. They are able to face the situations and they don't get stuck in depression. They don't get stuck in some kind of dark times, but they are able to move on. So this concept of social resilience might be a great alternative to traditional right-left inconclusive arguments about evils of government versus evils of free market. And these researchers say that it is adjustment to shock that will in future distinguish successful from unsuccessful societies. And my basic thesis is that the resources for social resilience are neither to be found on state level, only institutional level, nor on market level. And everybody who is parent now realize perfectly that we just cannot count on the Ministry of Education. We just cannot count on the like private providers of care, because even private providers are struggling now. So we realize that we cannot delegate responsibility for the well-being of our kids, neither to the state nor market. But on the other hand, we live in neoliberal societies, and neoliberalism meant erosion of many sources of social resilience, like strong family ties, community ties. So these resources are harder and harder to find. And now it's time to say, like, how Catholic social teaching from Pope Leo XIII to Pope Francis is providing us with possible great resources for social resilience. And I will talk about 3 kinds of these resources. First of them is the different sense of time, different sense of future. Now we are in a survival mode. Our brains, our minds, our bodies are in survival mode. We just try to survive from day to day. I talk from my experience, but it is an experience of many immigrant families living here in America, because we live in a very intercultural environment, and many of them are struggling and not being able to envision any future. Even institutional bodies, like on the level of county or state, are able to think just a few months ahead, and they project the future mostly in very pragmatic terms. So how to provide vaccinations, how to build new hospital infrastructure. So this is like there is some future, but we only think about it in very pragmatic, technical terms. But Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis, in all the documents, encyclicals, were constantly inviting us to speak about the future, not in pragmatic terms, but in terms of meaning. And if we observe the rising index of suicidal thoughts and suicidal attempts among youth in so many different countries, such different as Poland or Ireland or Iran even, so this high index of suicidal attempts is a sign that the young generations especially, they really need a meaningful way of speaking about future. They need to be given some ideals to live for. And if we look deeper into the documents of church, we can find like fantastic ideals to share with youth, to talk about with youth. And it is the ideal of a more just society, of fully realizing the dignity of each person, the ideal of the different concept of wealth. Especially Pope Francis in Laudato Si says that wealth, being rich, doesn't mean just having money. Wealth means that we realize the potential of each and every member of the society, the unique talents, imagination, thoughts of every member of the society. And this is the wealth. Wealth is realizing that every human being that is born can bring something new, and it is richness. So every new human being is enriching us with this very fact that he or she might bring new talents to the society. The ideal of civilization of life, the ideal of changing the concept of work, the dignity of work. So there are ideals that can be really attractive for youth if they are retold, they are conceptualized in a new way. And this is very urgent to focus in the religious education, ethical education, and like overall in the education to focus on giving the future some meaning. And we cannot wait for Greta Thunberg, this one girl, to do it for us. We have to do, as parents, as teachers, professors, we have to do it ourselves. So this was the first thing, the different sense of future, meaning of future, the ideals for future. The second point that might be important as a resource is solidarity, especially intergenerational solidarity and human rights of future generations. The sources of this concept of intergenerational solidarity can be found in John Paul II, in his documents about respect and dignity of older people of older age. And we can find the sentences, the quotes that are very inspiring to develop this concept. Pope Francis speaks about the rights of future generations very straightforward. He speaks about it in the 4th and 5th chapter of Laudato Si, when he extensively developed this concept of the rights of future generations. Their rights to the clean air, their rights to realize their potential using the resources of Earth that are still there, that are not wasted by the previous generations. So Pope Francis dared to say that future generations, the ones that don't yet exist, they have the same rights as the present ones. So this is like a great challenge for lawyers and a great challenge for us all to take into account their rights, the rights of future generations. So now we are very much concerned about the risk of COVID-19 for older generations and the death toll, the serious threat that this pandemic is for them. But it is also a great threat for younger generations that are deprived of normal childhood and normal conditions for education. So we have to take into account the rights of older generations, present generations, and future generations. And this is something that is very much present already in John Paul II teaching and well developed in Pope Francis teaching. And the third point, something that can really inspire our thinking about social resilience, is that welfare solutions are very needed, but welfare solutions should not be permanent. So Pope John Paul II and Pope Francis would agree that it is very easy to kill the spirit of creativity, the spirit of entrepreneurship, the spirit of hope, of this energy that is so characteristic for human person, that is this divine spark that it is in us. It is very easy to be killed by too extensive welfare system, but by the system in which people are just expected to be calm, to be peaceful, to receive what government gives to them, not protest too much, not complain too much. And such system can kill the society's creativity, and also it can kill the society's ability to be resilient. And it is like in a family. If we give our kids everything, if our parenting style is like a bonsai tree kids, we just take care so much of them. We don't make them face the challenges. We don't make them face failure. Then we prepare them to the world that will not be as home, so they may not cope with the challenges, with the real challenges of adult life. So in Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis tells a lot about the just distribution of goods, and he says also in Laudato Si, in Fratelli Tutti, he tells a lot about the distribution. But everywhere we can find this statement that these welfare solutions should not be permanent. They should help people in crisis, but they should not kill the spirit of entrepreneurship and the spirit of creativity. So And this is also something that was very close to John Paul II, to our Holy Father, because he was admiring the way, like, the work environment can bring the best from a human being, like somebody who is shy, somebody who doesn't know his or her talents, when she or he is in a good work environment, inspiring work environment, can flourish, can thrive, and can show his or her unique talents. And the work environment is this place, this special place, and the relationships in work that it can happen. So we cannot, like, think that welfare society is solution, because it also has its own threats, its own risks. So I just want you to remember these 3 points. There are many more probably, but today I just want to talk about the 3 of them: the different sense of future, giving meaning to future, ideals for youth, intergenerational society and the rights of future generations, and rethinking the way we build welfare, or rethinking the way we try to restore the welfare of societies, so that people don't get dependent on help. They don't get dependent on benefits, which might kill the creativity, the entrepreneurial spirit, and all these unique features that make societies resilient, that they make societies more immune to the future shocks, that the future shocks that may be even bigger than the shock we are experiencing now. Thank you very much for listening, and if there are any questions, opinions, anything to add, I will leave my email to Professor Dołęgowski so that we can continue the discussion. I wish everybody the best fruits of this conference, intellectual and spiritual fruits. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for your well, patience and for watching these 2 movies. In my opinion, very interesting and very inspiring. And I hope we have again the access to Professor Dębiński. Sorry for the problems. We have lost connection. Professor Dębiński, are you here?
Yes, I try to be with you. Yes.
Yes. Sorry for the. Well, I don't know what has happened, but we have lost connection. I was trying to contact with you by phone, but it was switched off. But later we have sent information to you by email. Okay, so you can continue. We can. I know that your time is also limited, but I hope we still have some time. So the floor is yours.
I will just take 10 minutes maybe to put my argument in a summary, and then we can maybe exchange, because I will not go to the presentation. Visibly something did not work on the presentation level. But I would like to focus on these 2 concepts. One is the technocratic paradigm developed by Pope Francis in Laudato Si, and the other one is the structure of sin, to which refers to Stefano Zamani earlier this morning, and it was articulated in 1987 in Solicitudo Rei Sociali. So the question is if there are commonalities, and what are the differences between these 2 notions or the 2 concepts. So I will skip the quotes, and I can share my presentation if somebody is interested, but I will skip the quotes and try to go to the core of the matter. If I understand properly the reasoning, the analysis of Pope Francis, the technocratic paradigm is built of three components, three main elements. One are resources and the power that commands these resources. And this power and resources materialize in a group of people that are in command of economy, maybe mainly of economy and to some extent of technology. So we can speak of technocracy. Technocracy as a sociological category, elites, but not including necessarily the intellectual elites. So technocracy is a very important element of this technocratic paradigm. But it is not enough. The technocracy lives and shares a common rationality, and this rationality is the economic rationality of profit-making and of efficiency. I have called it in my works, ethos of efficiency. But you cannot have a group of people that works coherently if they do not have a shared mentality, and this mentality is reflected in the specific rationality to which the Pope alludes on many instances in Laudato Si. And the third element of the paradigm, technocratic paradigm, is a bias that applies to the production of scientific knowledge. This is very important. On many instances, the Pope stresses the fact that science and technology are potentially able to bring many solutions to many problems. But, he says, it happens that there is a selection process, and the ideas and potentialities in science and technology that really are developed, that are turned into realities, are those that fit the ethos of efficiency paradigm and that are fit to be developed by existing power and resources structure. So you have these three elements: the situation, the structure of power, rationality, which exerts a bias on the production of knowledge that is selected to reinforce the structures, to reinforce the group, to reinforce the mentality, which again implies and rolls out the selection process on the level of technology. So we have to do with a feedback loop, with a self-reinforcing paradigm. And that is the main problem, and that the Pope identifies, that we have to do with a kind of systemic fatality, if to use a very strong word which is not used in the text. So how to go beyond, how to weaken, how to destroy, how to override this technocratic paradigm which is holding out very strongly in our world and produces a lot of negative externalities. And here the Pope sees three things. First, he speaks about the naked human, which is confronted a little bit like powerless with this coherent paradigm. But then he says what we need in paragraph 111, he says we need to be a distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, policies, an educational program, a lifestyle, and the spirituality, which together, not each of them, but which together generate resistance to the assault of the technocratic paradigm. So there is a way, but this way is combining a distinctive way of looking, a new thinking, new educational program, spirituality, and lifestyles. And then he goes on to speak about micro initiatives, like cooperatives, the alternative ways of doing economy. And he sees in these micro alternatives a kind of potential challenge from which can emerge, and it was very strongly mentioned during the Economia di Francesco last week or 10 days ago, this idea that there are around small initiatives that can be turned into a system that will be a challenge to the technocratic paradigm. But the third level is he speaks about cultural revolution. He says that all it shows the urgent need for us to move toward a bold cultural revolution. So there is a need for flow to come from outside of the paradigm, and he sees, maybe too strong in our analysis, but he sees this paradigm as not possible to be reformed or to be transformed. So the only source of optimism is to identify, to look at forces that could come from outside. So let's now turn in a few minutes to the Suicidal Sociali and the structure of sin. Just to contextualize, 1987, 20 years after Populorum Progressio, the major encyclical of Paul VI on the development issues, when Pope John Paul II speaks about the failure of development process. And he tries to reflect why the development process has failed, has been stalled, has not delivered what was expected in the 60s as being in the reach of the hand. The Populorum Progressio was a rather optimistic encyclical. And so John Paul II speaks about the importance of science and technology, but also the capacity of science of technology to deliver what is needed for development. But on the same side, he speaks about the dangers of this potentiality to be biased, to be devoided, to be misused. And and he speaks about the importance of moral decisions in this matter. Moral decision is very important in the reasoning of Paul VI, the individual moral decision. So in the paragraph 36, he speaks the following way: if the present situation can be attributed to difficulties of various kinds, it is not out of place to speak of structures of sin, which are rooted in personal sin and thus always linked to the concrete act of individuals who introduce these structures, consolidate them, and make them difficult to remove. And thus they grow stronger, they spread, and become the sources of other sins, and so influence people's behavior. Stefano Zamagni referred to the rules, to the rules that are changed, that are rules that are imposed on people to behave in a certain way. I think structure of sins can be seen as being at the root of this kind of rules. And I think this is important to see that the Pope, John Paul II, relates it to moral sins of individuals, which is not present in the analysis of Francis. Francis speaks of rationality, of way of behavior, possibly of rules, but there is no relationship between these and individual acts. It is a let's say, systemic analysis, but this dimension of individual sin, the responsibility, is absent. So how to do, coming back to Suicidal Sociali, how to overturn, how to destroy, how to turn structures of sin into what we called in the earlier works, structures of common good. The Pope, John Paul II, sees only one way. It's a moral attitude of actors. There is no other way, and he invokes very strongly the attitude of solidarity. I just took short quote: the attitude and structures of sin are only conquered by a diametrically opposed attitude, a commitment to good of one's neighbor with readiness, in the gospel sense, to lose oneself for the sake of the other instead of exploiting him. So there is no other way as to moral good. There is moral evil that is at the source of structure of sin. There is no other way to turn them down, to destroy them, but change the behavior, which is not so clearly articulated, as I said again, in Laudato Si. So to conclude, what are the main differences? What are the main commonalities? The main difference for me is the absence from technocratic paradigm of the analysis of the role of individual. It's a sociological, maybe systemic analysis, whereas John Paul II introduces the relationship between the micro level of individual behavior and the change in the system or in the structure that this behavior may generate, and in which the structure are trapped other people, possibly in lower level of responsibility, lower level of power, and there is a kind of behavioral trap. So this is very important. The other difference, important difference is, and which is related to it, is the absence in Laudato Si. Technocracy is there, and this technocratic element is absent from the analysis of Laudato Si. There is not a clear group of people that can be identified as being at the source of moral sin, of structure sin, but there are. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. We hear you.
Okay, because there was other voices. The very strong difference is that Laudato Si sees the combination of technology and the profit motive as being the source of technocratic paradigm. It's a signs of the times, because Laudato Si, in Sollecitudo Reli Socialis, what comes to the fore is the combination of political motives. We are in the Cold War period, we are in the situation of arm race, etc., where politics is very important. Economic is there, but the political motive is very important. So the Pope John Paul II says there are two possibilities of two situations in which structure of sin may emerge, where there is a profit motive, or where there is a power thirst in terms of ideological and geopolitical power. So what are the way outs? Here also there is a main difference. For Pope Francis, cultural revolution is the solution. Building alternatives outside of the paradigm is a solution, whereas the Pope John Paul II does not address it in such a way. I think he believes that structures can be transformed from within, provided people start, or those that are at the source of structures are able to behave or are willing to behave in a different way, and he brings to the fore the notion of solidarity, or the virtue of solidarity, as he calls it. So the main conclusion would be for me that the technocratic paradigm of Pope Francis appears to me to be a special case of structure of sin, provided we developed within this analysis of technocratic paradigm the role of the individual act. It is possible, but it's not done yet. So thank you very much for providing the opportunity for this comeback after the technological collapse. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Dębiński. It was very interesting that we were speaking about technology, and we had also technological problems. But probably it is very difficult now to have international seminar or conference without technical problems. Still, well. Is there questions or reflections to what Professor Dębiński has said? If somebody wants to ask, yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, you are welcome.
Well, is it me to whom you are talking? I put my hand on Teams. Okay. Can you see me? I suppose so.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Agnieszka Lekka-Kowalik, John Paul II Institute at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. Hello, Paul. We know each other from previous meetings. I have 2 comments and 1 question, actually referring to a question already raised. The comment is as follows. The first thing is, ideas have consequences. So how we understand rationality, how we understand ethos, so to speak, how we understand what are real resources is important for shaping reality. So I would like to remind the idea of both John Paul II and Benedict XVI about the reduction of rationality to instrumental rationality. So we stopped asking about goals and we are talking about means. And of course, if we need to talk about means, efficiency is a crucial term. So in a sense, we have to reform also our understanding. The second thing is that because there are no goals, there are only individual decisions. So John Paul II talks about individualism as a problem, anthropological problem, also Benedict XVI as well. And now my question. Well, we need to change, but the academic world is affected by the ethos of efficiency. In Poland, we have to earn points, not discover really truth. So it's more important to have points than to have well-justified claims. So if the academic world is affected, where should we look for leaders of that revolution? Individual leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments and question. Professor Dębiński, do you want to answer or comment?
Just a few words. Thank you very much, Professor Lekka-Kowalik, for your comments. I cannot relate to all of them, but I share many of the points. Of course, instrumental rationality is at the core of this technocratic paradigm designed or identified by Francis, where he speaks of the capture by economic rationality, by instrumental economic rationality of technology as potential for development of science and technology. So I think here we fully agree, and I know that John Paul II was also or identified this very clearly. I did recently research across from Rerum Novarum more or less up to today, what was the stance of different popes on the point of technology, and I could share maybe the paper. Unfortunately, it is in French. As to your question, which is not a question, which is a challenge, where to look for leaders. I think that in academia is still the world where the only place in this, let's say, organized world where there is a kind of freedom of thinking. And there are situations, of course, in which people are more, let's say, impressed or compressed by the efficiency criteria than the other. So there are people that are tenured that maybe care less about the efficiency elements of their institutional design and assessments, and are able to open new horizons. And this requires courage. And I think this is very important. Some stage it requires courage. And probably, in many cases, the intellectuals, some of them at least, are those for whom the risks are the lowest. They will not, if they have a tenured position, they will not lose their job because they do not write in one of the 5 best journals. There maybe will not be considered by the profession as being on the top. This might happen, but this is part of the risk. So I still think that academia has to provide, is one of the elements where the leaders can emerge. But I would add another point which is important. Many people are alone in their faculties, in their departments, in their universities, because they are thinking a little bit out of the road. And it is important, and we have instruments for this also through different European programs and so on, but not only, but private initiatives, to try to work together. Those that are marginalized in their universities because they do not, let's say, obey to the mainstream for good reasons, not for only for personal convenience, but they do not obey to the mainstream for good reasons. They have to work together through different interdisciplinary and interinstitutional networks. One of those, I tried to build the Observatoire de la Finance exact 25 years ago, exactly around this diagnosis. People are isolated in their institutions, so there maybe can find fora, I'm not speaking about platforms, but fora, which allow for better cooperation outside of the walls of their alma mater. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions and for the answer. Any other question, maybe? Has anybody a question to Professor Dębiński or comments? From my side, what are your expectations concerning the future? What you were speaking about, these structures of scene, the question of technological paradigm, and the question of leadership, academic leadership in the future. Partly after COVID. I know that you were also sick, yes? You also had problems with COVID, personally.
I experienced, unfortunately, without too much symptoms, so it was a light version. Yes, thank you very much for this. Well, there is more reflection than a clearly articulated view. I think that the trend, I refer to what Stefano Zamagni said 1 hour ago. There is a transformation or back to business as usual. And I think that the trend back to business as usual is very strong. And we are trapped in our structures. We are trapped in our structure. The margin of maneuver is very, very low. So transformation can only come now, I think, through policy measures that create new frameworks for generating different activities. Of course, one of the elements which is, I know, very much discussed in Poland for different reasons, but is the budget move at the level of European Union, where sustainability in terms of investment project, seems to be an important criteria. This is one example. Unfortunately, there are not many others, which would generate a transformation. This transformation is needed. It's not only for ecological reasons. It probably is required also because we have experienced during COVID a kind of existential crisis of our societies. It is not only about the level of income. It is not only about jobs. It is also about how we live together. The challenge on big cities, the challenge on inequality. These are the questions that have to be tackled. But intellectually, we identify them. But it's very difficult to see means and instruments to cope with them. As to academia, possibly the COVID story has shown that science is not the definitive answer to everything. When we have seen the battle for statistics, now the battle for vaccines, the battle for understanding. So science is slow and generates answers that are, to many instances, are questions. We need not only science, but we also need judgments. So science, especially in economics, has been to a large extent, has pretended to be only positive. And positive means replication of the existence. So we have to bring into the picture, maybe not the normative in terms of moralization, but at least the judgment dimension in economic analysis, the judgment dimension in scientific analysis. Such, I think it is very important.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Is there any other question? If not, I know that Professor Dębiński also has some other duties. Maybe he will be able to be with us for later. But now I thank you very much for your very interesting speech. Sorry for the problem, for the technical problems, but it's very important when we have overcome them. And when I want to comment that, of course, science cannot do everything and technology cannot do everything, but I hope that, well, as we have managed the problem, we have overcome the problem technological here in our connection, I also hope that we will be able to overcome the crisis of COVID, but of course, it doesn't neglect the thesis that the science is not everything. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. And now I want, well, you are going to have a break, but I don't think it is necessary now to have a break because we have Michał Łuczewski here online. Are you here, Michał? Or not yet?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hello. We are very welcome. So we are thinking about the break, but I think maybe it's better not to have a break. I don't know if people want, but you are the last person now, so I don't think that the break is a good idea. So in my opinion, you can start in a moment, and a very short presentation. Michał Łuczewski is sociologist, specialist in sociology, very interesting and very inspiring books he has written. Book about the everlasting nation. It was his PhD, and about the moral capital. Partly historical, partly sociological text, but he is also interested in some economical questions, and he was also vice director of the John Paul II Research Institute in Warsaw. Now he works, I think, mostly at Warsaw University at the Department of Sociology. And his idea of the presentation was a little bit challenging. John Paul II and the religion of capitalism. So, Michał, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Am I heard? I hope I am.
Okay.
After those very dense and very scholar presentations, also thinking that I'm the last to present and we proceed without a pause, my presentation will be a little bit lighter. So please excuse me for that lighter tone, but on the other hand, think about John Paul II as the one who had a sense of humor and also sense of lightness. He was not a human being writing only great works, but he was also just a human being. So let me present what I have prepared for you. I will turn in presentation. So give me a moment to do that. Okay, and I will also present a short clip with John Paul II. I hope that you will see that as well. Okay, so do you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So yeah, as I was announced by Tomasz, I will present John Paul II and the religion of capitalism. That's my theme. I will have 4 theses on capitalism, 4 theses on Pope John Paul II, and then 4 elements or 4 understandings of what is religion. So that would be quite complex, but just please remember 4, 4, 4. That will be the main theme of that presentation. And now 4 theses on capitalism. But the way I'm looking at religion is that religion is a form of social cohesion, so a principle of social unity. In that sense, wherever there is social unity, wherever there is moral community, there is religion. So here I'm referring to sociological understanding of religion, not a, say, Catholic vision of religion, and that is quite specific. So religion, in other words, is everywhere where is community, or more specifically, where is moral community. So for the sake of my presentation, I encourage you also to think that religion is a principle of social cohesion. And capitalism is a very modern and very novel form of social cohesion, where economic capital is a dominant one. And therefore, capitalism is a form of religion, is a form of bonding together people, of making people not fight with one another, but of turning them into a kind of community that is based on exchange of goods or on economic capital in general. But that religion is a special form of religion that, in my understanding, has a ritualistic element to that. And it means that although capitalism forms bonds between us, it also deconstructs them. So we are in a form of continual deconstruction of bonds between us, where processes of scapegoating come to the fore. So scapegoating under contemporary conditions of that economic system we are living under bring about scapegoating and bring about violence and bring about aggression. I think this is what Professor Zamani referred to using the phrase of structures of evil or structures of sin. So these are 4 theses on capitalism. Capitalism, to make a long story short, I will elaborate on that, is a religion, so a form of building social capital, of building social unity, but at the same time, capitalism deconstructs bonds between us. So we are scapegoating one another under capitalism without misrecognizing that, without recognizing that. Now 4 theses on John Paul II and Karol Wojtyła. John Paul II and Karol Wojtyła was a stumbling block and is a stumbling block to that constant self-perpetuating structure of sin or structure of evil. And this is also partial answer why he is scapegoated, because you cannot try to contain something without finding yourself in danger of being removed. So Wojtyła is a scandal and a stumbling block to contemporary capitalism. What he encourages us to do is that we leave that sphere of constant rivalry to our own sanctuary. So this is a conversion from structures of evil. Let me use that Zamanis and Karol Wojtyła's phrase, to our internal spiritual life. So he encourages us to convert from evil to good. And he also embodies, and I think this is very important, he also embodies the most important principle that secures our sanity under capitalism, and this is a principle of non-anxious presence. In other words, John Paul II shows us with his body, with his acting, with his being, what we should do under capitalism. We should be present, but without fear, without being afraid. And this is no wonder that this is how he started his pontificate, encouraging us with Christ, have no fear. Have no fear and be present. Be present, have some core. And that would be a bold claim that Catholic mysticism that was embodied by John Paul II is a way, is an answer to capitalism we are living in. So four theses on John Paul II. And what I would like to do is from a theoretical perspective, is kind of phenomenology of John Paul II's presence. So I want not only to read his works, but to look at him. Because when we read somebody, we just take an element of his action. This is what Professor Beretta referred to, that John Paul II wrote that masterpiece entitled The Acting Person. But writing is only just an element of our actions. And actually our presence, our way of being is our action. Like Christ. Christ didn't write anything. He was who he was. And therefore we can write about Christ, we can understand Christ. So by the same token, we can also understand John Paul II as a saint, just looking at him. But at the same time, I want to combine it with mimetic theory, theory that is developed by René Girard and by his colleagues and then his students. And that mimetic theory allows us to understand also what it means to be present, allows us to understand what it means to be saint. So this is one approach to young Karol Wojtyła. We see that his face is a living face, that he's calm, that he looks somewhere, but his face is relaxed. But at the same time, he's reading. Probably he's reading his breviary. This is what this is my hunch. But there's something more always about John Paul II, and I want to look at him as an icon, as a saint who is showing us that some different reality is present. And one of his favorite metaphors was a metaphor of being transparent. So he wanted to be transparent to us, for us to see something else. And first, I hope that I will be able to show the short video. Tomek, do you see the video or not? Tomek?
Not yet.
Okay, so probably I have to. Okay, so I will show the video, and I hope that it will be seen. Okay.
Now we see you.
You see me? You don't see the video?
No, no. You.
Do you see that?
Okay. Now, yes. Now we see, but
You see it?
But you have to come back to the beginning, I think.
Once again?
Okay. Yes. But because we are in the middle of the movie.
Yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Are you sure? Aha, but we don't hear. So maybe.
Okay, it's maybe not so important as to hear. I will just say that he's presented. It's 1979, and he's presented with a T-shirt by high school students, and it takes place in the Madison Square Garden. So even if you don't hear, there's not much actually to be heard. So you'll see just what's going on. So this is.
Qui oggi ci presentiamo con questi nostri simboli e magliette. Charismatic movement. Thank you. You know what it is. You know we shall destroy the program. Destroy the program. Dear young people, I am happy to be with you in Madison Square Gardens.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so
we hear you.
Okay,
but I don't see you.
Okay, so
okay, now it's okay.
Okay. Okay, you see me, hopefully.
Okay.
Yes. So this is what I call it phenomenology of his presence. So analyzing who he was. And that was probably one of the most important moments in his papacy. It was 1979, when the whole world was looking at him. And the whole world was waiting for him to say something. So they were waiting for his homily. And he was silent, or rather murmuring, for 7 minutes. I showed you a shorter clip to show you how much resilient he was. So he did not do what was expected from him. He didn't play the Pope game, but he was able to be with those young people here and now. And I think that this is, if I was to be silent for 1 or 2 minutes, you know, I couldn't. That would be a nightmare for you, or maybe when Tomek would try to be silent, after 30 seconds, probably somebody would drag him out. But here we had a head of the Catholic Church who was able to just be for 7 minutes for those people. There are lots of things going on in that clip, and there's no time to elaborate on that, but I will try to give you several insights. What to do to understand him. So this is what's called dramatic triangle. In dramatic triangle, we try to play some game. We try to be a rescuer. We try to be a victim or to be a persecutor. And John Paul II could be a rescuer. He could just say to young people, look, I will save you. I'm giving you the good message. He could try to impress them. That would be that role of rescuer. But then he could be a victim. If he was, when he was approached by one of the clergy, American clergy, he could be just, he could hide his face in hands, saying, you know, well, what happened? You know, here I'm the pontiff, but I'm approached and reproached by American archbishop. So he could feel a victim, or he could be a victim of those chanting crowd. And then he could also attack those young people, saying, you know, you should be quiet. This is me who is talking now. Or he could attack that archbishop, that American archbishop. You know, this is me who is in charge. But he didn't do that. And whenever we are taking those roles, we perpetrate anxiety. So we are anxious. We are playing the game. And rather than that, John Paul II was a challenger for us. Challenger because he made us think, and I think that even now we are anxious when we are watching him. So his presence is challenging for us. He tries to show us something. So he's our coach, let's say. but at the same time he creates a new space. So within those 3 minutes you saw, he moved beyond the dramatic triangle to empowerment dynamic, to the dynamic when we are present to one another. In other words, he tried to build community between those people. He tried to build, in that sense, religious community. And there are several ways of building community. We saw just one way. We'll talk about that one way of building community. But I want to show you 4 ways, 4 universal ways of building community. And to understand how we can build community, I'm starting with Pneumatic Desire. Many of you probably know that idea of René Girard. He says, and he actually built his own theory around that, very simple insight, that we desire not something because of its internal value, but because of that value is mediated with the desire of somebody else. So in other words, we desire something, we want something because somebody else, who is our mediator, desires the same thing. So capitalism, in this view, would be the dominance of mediated desire. We crave for prestige, for money. We crave for social status. We crave for goods, not because of their intrinsic values, but because other people who are our models, mediators, show us that those objects are important. So I hope that this is quite straightforward. One important element of the theory is that the distance between subject and mediator is what matters, because when our model who mediates our desire for some object is close to us, we become rivals, because we want to grab the same good. We are fighting for the same good. On the other hand, what is also important is that when we are close to one another, we become rivals, and in the final instance, we become aggressive to one another. So all societies are, because of that simple principle, are endangered by disruption, by internal collapse, in war of all against all. So then the question of life and death really is the question how we can contain our mimetic desire. So what we can do so that we are not rivals who are killing one another because we are striving for the same goods. And that was a question of life and death for archaic societies where goods were scarce. And this is also a question for us. And there were 4 ways that were invented for us to contain mimetic desire. One was law, the other was ritual, the third one was love. And I think that what we saw with John Paul II and Madison Square Garden, that was love there. That was being here and now, that was self-disclosure, there was self-giving, many things, but that was principle of love. This is principle that is represented by Christians. And the 4th principle is the principle of capitalism. And I want to make that bold claim that capitalism resolves that problem of mimetic desire in a completely new way that was not attainable in archaic societies, and it was not attainable even in Christian societies. So law and ritual are characteristic of archaic societies, love is characteristic of Christianity, of church, and capitalism is characteristic of contemporary culture. How they work? Law limits our mimetic desire. When you take 10 commandments, commandments impose taboos. We cannot crave for the wife of our neighbor. We cannot crave for some objects that belong to our neighbor. So this is the principle of law, and the principle of law tells us to limit our mimetic desire, or even to abandon mimetic desire altogether. But in archaic societies, it is never possible, because mimetic desire is a part of our nature. So we will always crave what other people desire. This is our human nature. So then archaic societies, in archaic societies, we had a paradoxical way of containing mimetic desire by exacerbating mimetic desire. So in rituals, we break all the taboos that are imposed by the law. So we are encouraged to be more aggressive, to give rein to our aggression, to our sexuality that becomes unhinged. So what is imposed by law is broken by ritual. And this is a paradoxical way, because it makes that society more anxious. There are more and more rivalries. There's more and more mimetic desire, and there's more and more rivalry. And in the final instance, there's war of all against all. And from that war of all against all, we move beyond by finding a scapegoat, whom we make responsible for that war. We don't understand rituals today, but when you look, for example, at carnivals, this is the time when that typical rules of law are overcome. And what was disallowed is allowed and encouraged, as a matter of fact. And mimetic desire is here quenched or limited by exacerbating mimetic desire. Once we find a scapegoat who's responsible for, who's attributed responsibility for what's going on, we eliminate the scapegoat, and then the whole society reunites on the corpse of the scapegoat. So this is these are two principles that are working in archaic societies. Then, with the revelation of Christianity, we have a third principle, that we sublime mimetic desire. We do not desire what other people desire. We enter internal world. We discover that we should not imitate these worldly models, but we should imitate Christ in self-giving and forgiving, and in making one with other people. So we don't want what other people want. We want what Christ wants. And it means that we imitate him, and we self-give, and we forgive, and we try to build one. And this is a revelation of Christianity, very fragile, because we have a tendency to come back to law and to come back to ritual. And then the fourth way, this is actually a very revolutionary one, is a capitalistic way. You don't have to sublime mimetic desire. You don't have to have internal life. You don't have to have a mystic life. You can satisfy your mimetic desire because we will produce more objects for you. If you desire what other people desire, we will have it for you. So we move from the world of scarcity of goods to the world of abundance of goods. So capitalism gives us a hope, a religious hope, that our mimetic desire will be satisfied. And look, actually, neither law, nor ritual, nor love satisfy our mimetic desire. And here, for the first time, we have that promise, that religious, salvific promise of satisfying the desire. So I think that this is a completely new way of building a social world, a social cohesion. So four ways of building social cohesion, four religions religion of law, that is Judaism, religion of ritual. You might find it in contemporary carnivals or parties. They have also that ritualistic element. In Poland, I think that you can look at strikes, women's strikes, in that way, that these are rituals. Then we have a religion of love, that is Christianity, and then we have a religion of satisfaction of mimetic desire, that is capitalism. We have a religion of abundance of goods, of material goods, that is capitalism. To make it more clear, law imposes taboos and prohibitions. It introduces boundaries and hierarchies. The dynamics is there that there's some God, some father figure that imposes some law. So there is one against all dynamics, and then everybody has to obey the law. So everybody has to be submitted or submissive to that father figure. And I think this is the way you can understand Islam. When there are strict boundaries between faithful and unfaithful, women and men, all older people and younger people, heterosexuals and homosexuals. This is the world of full of taboos and prohibitions, where there is God who is omnipresent and who is like a lawgiver above all. And then the only way we can respond is just by obeying the law, by submitting ourselves to that. So this is the religion of law. In rituals, we break the taboos and prohibitions that were prescribed by law. We are overcoming boundaries and hierarchies. And we have a dynamics of all against all. So we fight with one another. And then there's all against one dynamics. And you can think about our modern times, that we have hardly any taboos and prohibitions. We have hardly have any boundaries and hierarchies between, say, sexual orientations, between generations, between faithful and unfaithful. So everything that is prescribed by Islam, one could say, so by kind of archaic religion, is encouraged by modernity. And the ruling element of that social world is not submission. So we don't want to be submissive to anybody, but we want to transgress. We want to experiment. So transgression is something that is on personal level the ruling element of ritual. Love, the principle of love, fulfills the law, but not by obeying some cruel father, but by loving neighbors and enemies, by redefining boundaries and hierarchies, by the dynamics where we want to sacrifice our well-being to other people. We want to give more than get. And it's not transgression, it's not submission, it's a conversion. So we want to witness to something that is more, or to somebody who is more. We want to also self-sacrifice. I will just briefly sum it up. In primordial, in times before capitalism, our society was very hierarchical. There were boundaries between strata, between people. You see it here. So there were male and female. There were strata. There were kids. There were those who are on the top, those who are on the bottom. So we could not we could desire what other people desire, but we were not in conflict with them. We are not rivals because we were separated by boundaries. So somebody could wish that somebody was a queen, but it was obvious that nobody would be. In modern times, our rivals become closer and closer to us because we don't have boundaries between us. There are no hard boundaries between social strata. Everybody can be a queen on Instagram, and the queens are not queens anymore because they can be just eliminated on social media. So yeah, even Meghan Markle can be a queen if she wants, but at the same time she can be also destroyed and criticized for not being a queen. So what's going on in modern society is that once those boundaries between us collapse, we become closer and closer to one another, and it means that we become rivals. That rivalry, especially on social media, doesn't have any boundaries. It's unbound rivalry. Everybody is the same, but at the same time, everybody can be a king. Like here, you see Slim Shady, but we are all more or less our doubles. And what happens there, because we are rivals, because we desire what other people desire, there will be aggression and there will be scapegoating as well. So we have a cancel culture. We have that switch from rivalry of all against all to all against one. This is his fault, his or her fault. And then let me, by way of summary, let me come back to John Paul II. What he encouraged us to do under such conditions. He said that I repeated after Professor Zamani, that we can change the system. We can change the structures of evil that set us against one another, and then we start scapegoating other people. But we are part of the system, because that system is internalized. We have that chaos of rivalry also in ourselves. So what we can do is just to go inside ourselves and to see that we are rivals and scapegoats within us. And this is what John Paul II discovered, actually, in my perspective. This is what he discovered for us, that the more anxiety is around us, the deeper our spiritual life has to be, so that we can contain that anxiety, so we can be non-anxious present. We can be facing the crowd, but still being ourselves without becoming part of the crowd. So it means that John Paul II is more needed than ever before, because we are more anxious than ever before. We have more. There's more rivalry. There are more psychological challenges we face than ever before. And this is the poster we ran 5 years ago during the presidential campaign, that Karol Wojtyła is our candidate in our everyday elections choices. Now, of course, he would be, and he is criticized, but for me it only shows that we want to just get rid of that stumbling block for our way of life. So what we have to do is just to revisit John Paul II as a person, as an acting person, once again, to visit the places where he built his own personhood. And this is Kalwaria Zebrzydowska, probably the most important place he visited, one of his most important shrines. We have to also revisit his internal life and also his poems. This is a poem about actor, and actually he's describing ourselves, that we are people in whose brains there are crowds, and we cannot answer who we really are. And as John Paul II, as young, actually, Karol Wojtyła wrote, that we cannot look at ourselves without fear, because we are so disintegrated. And then the question is how we can integrate ourselves. For John Paul II and Karol Wojtyła, that was the way of Carmelite mysticism. This is one of his early poems, The Distant Shores of Silence. Here he writes that we have to uncover and discover for us silence within us. So we have to come back to ourselves where there's anxiety around us, and we have to discover somebody. And he discovered his friend. He discovered Christ. This is one way. The other way was the way of total devotion to Mary. So he not only discovered Christ in him, but he also discovered Mary, and he could model his desire after Mary's desire. When he said that totus tuus, that all yours, and that all that is mine is yours, he wanted to give his life into the hands of somebody else. So in other words, that is his last poem. He encouraged us to have a spiritual life, not as an addition to our life, but as a necessary source for us. And in the Roman Triptych, he wrote about that source, that we have to seek and don't give up to find that source within us. And once you find that source, you can be non-anxious and you can be present in the face of death of your closest, like his parents. He is also non-anxious, but he is there. And you can also have that challenging presence when people around you challenge your worldview. You can still be. So this is this much what I have prepared for you, with a footnote that what I wanted to achieve here is to show that as scholars we should not confine ourselves only to reading John Paul II, but actually we should cultivate the same method he cultivated, so the method of phenomenology. We should look at somebody, we should understand his presence, and understanding his presence gives us a way, I think, to dealing with anxiety and the way to surviving capitalism that is building that anxiety between us and within us in an exponential manner. So John Paul II is more needed than ever before. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michał. Thank you. Now I want to ask if anybody has question or comment. Yes, I see. I don't know who, but you can ask, please.
Good afternoon, Professor Łuczewski. Thank you for your presentation. My question is related to one of your parts, exactly law, ritual, love, and capitalism. So, having in mind that the modern world is based mostly on capitalism, and we as Christians want, well, slightly different system. How could we apply the rules of Catholic social teaching and the rules of the point 3, so love, in the modern world? How to encourage all the people with all these rules, while at the same time we are secularizing, there are less and less Catholics, and yeah, how to do that in the wider society?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a question for the previous panel, because we had people who really could influence the political sphere and also economic sphere. I think this is what actually Pope Francis is doing, that he shows that Catholic social teaching is something that is not only for Catholics, but it's actually for all people of goodwill. So we can influence Pope Francis, and I think it is possible. I remember that there are some students of Tomek who met actually Pope Francis several years ago during World Youth Days, and they try to share their visions of capitalism with him. So I think that there is a good way also of approaching Pope Francis, who is actually who doesn't want to play the Pope game. He doesn't want to be, you know, the rescuer of the world. He's not a victim, but he also doesn't attack people. So he's also moving beyond that dramatic triangle. So first, Marcin, if I can say and encourage you, I should, if I were you, I would contact Pope Francis and ask him what to do, and share your thoughts. But also Professor Zamani, maybe he would give you email of Pope Francis. So we can just play that big game, and I think that Francis is playing that big game. But then it's a question why people actually are listening to Pope Francis, because as you rightly saw, that we are secularizing. There are less and less Catholics in Europe and in America, although there are more and more Catholics all over the world. So we don't have to be so obsessed with the West. So what we can then the question is why people, secularized people, are listening to Pope Francis, and I think this is because they feel, in my interpretation, a little bit psychoanalytic interpretation, because they are part of law and ritual, but they feel that they need something more, and we all need something more. After the revelation of Christ, we won't be satisfied with goods, we won't be satisfied with transgressions, and we won't be satisfied with law. Our heart is anxious for something else. And I think that people, especially people who are secular, they need Pope Francis and they need Catholic social teaching much more than we do. And they unconsciously feel that. Sometimes they even, you know, they love Catholic social teaching to the extent that they try to hate it and to destroy it. But the hatred and destruction are the signs of relation. We destroy what we love, so we destroy our shadows. So I think that there is that thirst among secular people for something more. And when they even attack Catholics and Catholic social teaching, I take it as a sign of engagement. Actually, I don't need Catholic social teaching to have a good family. I have a good family anyway. So, but those people who have whose life has disintegrated, they need Catholic social teaching much more than I do. So Catholic social teaching is not for Catholics; it's for all secularists whose life is in ruins. And last but not least, I think that we can go from that global level to that level of our interactions with secular world to the level of personal witness, and I think that we should be just non-anxious, and I think this is what is the most important thing. So if we can be non-anxious, and if we can be like John Paul II, if we can show to the crowds something else, that we can show our spiritual life, not as an addition, as like I said, but as something that is necessary for people today, that cannot be done with mindfulness. That mindfulness, for me, for example, for me, mindfulness is a cover for capitalism. So we are working all the time, and then we are mindful. We need prayer. We need a much deeper spiritual life than mindfulness. Actually, a friend of mine, Nikodem Bądźa-Tomaszewski, said that Carmelite piety should be like contemporary yoga. So we should show the spirituality of Ignatius. We should show spirituality of Saint Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross as something that is expedient for the contemporary world, as a source. Like it should be like contemporary yoga. I don't know why we can do it, but we have treasures and we cannot share them with the world. That's the question.
Okay, thank you. We have lost vision, but we still hear each other. So maybe any person also would like to ask the question or comment. We have again some technical problems, but we hear each other, I think. So it is possible. My question, well, my reflection is such: you are not the only one who thinks about capitalism as a religion. Maybe, well, for example, a friend of mine, professor from United States, Professor Robert Nelson, has written a book, Economics as a Religion. More something different when economics is not the same as capitalism, but also, well, everything sometimes can become a religion. For me, it is very interesting. Also your reflections about today's controversies and crises. We observe social turmoil and also big disputes and big quarrels about the modern world, and about the role, also about the role of John Paul II. I know that for you it was a very specific situation, because you were born in a rather not very religious family, but you have become a very religious person later. And for me, it's also very interesting that the problem of why do you think that René Girard is so big inspiration for you now? Because I realize that you are very strongly inspired by René Girard.
Yes.
I not always understand René Girard very well, but I think that he is an important person.
Yes. Yeah. So why Girard is important? I think actually I read it somewhere in Ratzinger that what we would need in 21st century, and this is the 21st century, is the combination of faith and reason. And I think that Girard combines faith and reason. Of course, this is the main theme of Fides et Ratio by John Paul II. But sometimes we become in contemporary culture too much focused on our reason, and it means that we are like too law-oriented, that we want to just think about reality. And on the other hand, we want to feel reality. So there's that faith that is just very fideistic. And somebody actually, I think that was Professor Simona Beretta, who referred to that fideism. And I think that Girard is extremely modern scholar. He was called by Michel Serres as a Darwin of social sciences. So he has an incredibly powerful social insights. But at the same time, he saw that you can combine one could say, purely atheistic, rebellious, irreverent scholarship with deep faith. Girard, while discovering his own theory, he also got converted to Catholicism. So his way was a religious way. That was a faith. That was reason who drew him closer to faith. But at the same time, he was actually a non-anxious, present man who would not survive in contemporary academia because he loved talking with people. He was a good conversationalist. He was not fond of publishing essays. So he was just a great person, and for me, he is just a father of the church whose scholarship remains undisputed. He was taken to those 40 immortals. So those 40 immortal representatives of French Academy. So that this is the highest status you could reach in French academia. But on the other hand, he was a man of faith, and this is what I also try to do in my life. I thought when I was a kid, and later on, that reason is an enemy of faith, and if I want to be a rational person, I have to be anti-Catholic and I have to be Pope John Paul II. But then I understood that reason and faith, they have to go together, and that sometimes we have a religion of reason, and we don't understand actually. We are so intellectual that we don't understand our life, and we don't understand also society. So we have some moral ground to understand society, and that moral ground comes from faith. It can come from, say, socialist faith, some ideological faith, or it can come from a person. And I prefer that we start with a person whom we want to imitate and whom we want to follow into their footsteps. So for me, John Paul II was such a person.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if there is any other person who wants to ask anything, because I don't see the screen now. But maybe somebody wants to ask something. If yes, if not, well, we have come to the end of this day, or it is almost 1 o'clock, so we are in time, and at 1 o'clock more or less we have to finish, and we will continue tomorrow. Tomorrow will be still time for some speeches in English. First of all, speakers for tomorrow, Professor Ewa Barnowska-Prokop and also Professor Horodecka and Dr. Żuk, and we also have the presentation by Professor Alford, Helen Alford, who is a very interesting person because she is English, she is Catholic, she is nun, and she is professor in Rome at the university. And I think her presentation can be also very, very interesting. And later we will have so-called Polish corner. So there will be some, in my opinion, very interesting speeches in Polish. We could, I think, now also come back to Polish language, because I think most of our participants are Polish. But formally it is English. It is English corner now. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presence and presentations and presence, and for your also patience because of some technical problems. I'll apologize for them, but it happens sometimes. In my opinion, we have heard two very interesting and very different approaches and two very different reflections by Professor Zamani, who is economist, and Professor Dębiński, who is economist, and later Professor Beretta, who is economist but very humanistic oriented, and Mrs. Rogaczewska, who is Dr. Rogaczewska, who is a very dynamic personality, and Michał Łuczewski, who is a sociologist and social philosopher I can say. So thank you very much. Thank you also to our persons who are helping us, to technical staff, to my students who have participated and helping in some moments when the help was necessary. And I hope we will continue tomorrow. Tomorrow at about 9:30 we will start. So thank you very much and goodbye. See you tomorrow.